If you spent any time at all on YouTube looking for study advice, then you've probably come across this video called Study Less, Study Smart. Now, this is a recorded lecture from Professor Dr. Marty Lobdell, who is a former psychology professor at Pierce College and wanted to give his thoughts on how to be an effective student. And the video came out when I was a sophomore in college and I wanted to watch it, but the problem was it was an entire hour long and I could just never make the time. Now, I've seen a lot of students say the exact same thing about the video, so what I want to do with this video is try to give you about 80 to 90% of the value packed within the lecture in about 1/10 of the time. So to do that, I first watched the lecture myself and took detailed notes on it. And if you want those notes, I've actually included them at the end of this video. But first, let's get into the tips. So tip number one is to break your studying into chunked sessions. And the reason for this is that the average student can only really pay attention for about 25 to 30 minutes. And this goes across the board from lectures to reading to studying. After about 25 to 30 minutes, your efficiency starts to really taper off. And that's why the advice to simply study more is not effective at all. Instead, you want to break your study sessions into about 20 to 30 minute chunks. And after those are done, take 5-minute breaks where you do something fun or at least away from your studies. And also, once your study sessions are done for the entire day, you want to give yourself a real tangible reward for doing it. As Dr. Lobdell says in the lecture, reinforcement of positive things builds good study habits. And as an added benefit, you're training yourself to study. So as you keep doing this, you're going to be able to study for longer and longer on each session. Tip number two is to create a dedicated study area. And the reason for this is that our environment, the context that we're in, largely determines our behavior. So think about when you're in class. When the professor presents a question to the entire class, you instinctively raise your hand. But if he asks you specifically, you're going to give a verbal response. And this is automatic. You're conditioned to do it. Well, your studying area is the exact same. If you do it in a place where you're conditioned to do other things like sleep or play video games or hang out with friends, it's going to be really hard to get into your studying. What you want to do is find an area that is specifically used for studying. So the context of the situation makes it easy for you to get into your studies. Dr. Lobdell's third tip is to study actively. And it's best summed up with this quote straight from the lecture. The more active you are in your learning, the more effective you'll be. Now, the best way to do this, rather than going through rote memorization or reading and rereading chapters from your book, is to first ask yourself before studying, what is it that I'm learning? And what you're learning is going to fall into one of two categories, either facts or concepts. A concept is something like, what does this particular bone in the human body do? You have to understand it. And a fact is just something you need to remember, what the name of this bone is. Now, concepts are more important than facts because once you learn a concept, once you truly understand its inner workings, it's with you forever. You're going to remember it. Facts, on the other hand, can sort of drift away over time, and the good thing about that is that we have Google. We can look up facts very easily. Now, unfortunately, in a testing situation in class, you have to remember both facts and concepts, and you don't have access to Google usually, but still, concepts are going to be more important to learn first. Now, the best way to learn these concepts and to be sure you know them is to put them in your own words. Test yourself and learn actively. And there's one thing he gives as an example, which I think is one of the most important parts from the entire lecture, and it's his example about highlighting. Now, most students know not to highlight entire sections of the book because if you do that, you're basically highlighting nothing at all. But if you highlight really important terms and then you go back after your first read and highlight session and study them and just simply recognize the thing you highlighted before and say, ooh, I know it, then you're getting into this dangerous territory where you don't know whether you're actually recalling something or simply recognizing it. Now, the human brain is very good at recognizing things. We can recognize people's faces even if we haven't seen them in a long time. But the difference between recognition and recollection is that recognition requires an initial trigger, a cue. And if you're in a test, there is no trigger or cue. You have to actually pull it forth from your memory. So to test and make sure that you're actually recalling something instead of just recognizing it, you need to quiz yourself. You need to do active studying and active learning. The fourth tip is to take more effective notes, and he's really brief on this one. Basically, he says, after class, as soon as possible, and truly as soon as possible, flesh out your notes a bit. Add some more to them so you can actually solidify the concepts in your mind. And if you're fuzzy on something, ask another classmate who also took good notes, or go to office hours or wait to the next lecture and ask the professor before he starts if he can clarify something that you don't really have a good grasp on. The fifth tip is to summarize or teach what you learn, and he says the best way to actually learn something is to teach it, and the reason for this is twofold. Number one, it's a great form of active studying because you're forcing your brain to recall all the information so you can basically summarize it for somebody, and number two, you're really making sure that you fully understand the subject. If you're explaining it to somebody who has absolutely no idea about the topic and they're coming at it from a beginner's perspective, then you're really going to have an easy time of pinpointing gaps in your own understanding. Tip number 6 is to use your textbooks correctly 3, and in this part of the lecture, he goes over the SQ3R method, which stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. And as I talked about in my active reading video, I think overarching systems like this are actually kind of cumbersome and time consuming, but I do think it's important that you take individual portions of these systems and see if they're worth it for your studying methods. So as an example, the survey portion of SQ3R, surveying the chapter before you read it, and especially going to the end and looking at the review questions and the vocabulary can really prime your brain for picking out the most important information when you actually do the reading. And Dr. Lobdell's 7th and final tip is to use mnemonics when studying facts. Now, facts, as opposed to concepts, are a lot harder to tie actual meaning to, and as a result, a lot of students often turn to simple rote memorization to remember them. But a better way to go about it is to use mnemonics. And a mnemonic is really any system that facilitates recall, but he goes over 3 specific types of mnemonics in the video. And those 3 are acronyms, things like Roy G. Biv for remembering the color spectrum, coined sayings, things like in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and the third one, which both I and Dr. Lobdell think is the best one, image associations. Another way to think about image associations are just interacting images, including the thing you're trying to study, that create a ridiculous picture or story in your head. And the more emotionally evocative or weird it is, the more easily you're going to be able to recall that piece of information. So that is my summary of Dr. Lobdell's lecture. If you want to see the entire hour-long video, I have it linked down in the description. Otherwise, you can get my notes and other things in the end card. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end of my video. Now if you want to get even more study tips, I made a video about advanced study tips last week, and you can see those by clicking the thumbnail. Also, if you want to get new study tips every single week and ways to be an awesome college student, then just click the big red subscribe button right there. As I said in this video, you can get my detailed notes on the entire lecture by clicking the orange button to go to the companion blog post for this video. And also, if you want to become an awesome studier, I wrote a 100+ page book on how to get better grades, and you can get it for free by clicking the picture of the book. Lastly, if you want to connect with me or have ideas for new videos, you can either connect with me on Twitter at TomFrankly or just leave a comment on this video.